Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome, hello to my Nipissing University friends here, and I wanted to go over this first assignment and kind of instead of just sending you a link to a document or something like that, actually kind of going over and walking through it with you and kind of talking about it. Okay, so I'm calling this Giants of Psychology. So the idea with this assignment is I really want everyone to pick one of these huge figures in the history of psychology and get into some of their ideas and what those ideas kind of contributed to the broader field of psychology. Because I know that this class is a developmental psychology class, but that's a more recent label to kind of like a subdivision of a bigger field, and understanding who some of these people that we talk about in class, like Freud and Piaget and Erikson, and how those people kind of fit into the broader framework of this whole story of psychology, which is like roughly 150 or so years old, and that kind of led to the point where we're at today, where you're at a place like Nipissing and you're taking like a developmental psych course, or you could take like an evolutionary psychology course maybe, or like a cognitive psych, or you're learning about cognitive behavioral therapies and all these different kinds of branches, and where that stuff comes from, and what are some of the roots of all that. So the purpose of this, so this is the CHSF 2106 Digital Workshop Part 1, that the assignment objective. So this is kind of the point I was making there, is that developmental psychology is a discipline with deep roots in the history of psychological thought. In this assignment, I want each of you students to explore the works of one of the great psychologists that are listed below, okay, with a focus on how their teachings can be applied in real and meaningful ways in 2020, right? So that's kind of one of the things I want you really kind of using as your kind of mental approach to this assignment. I'm going to list a kind of series of questions in a second, but this idea of not just telling me about who this person was, but why their ideas are, what's their big idea, why is that important, how does that have relevance to now and relevance to your life. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the names a little bit, and then I'll get into some more specifics about assignment instructions. Okay, so some of these names you'll have definitely heard. Some of you might not have heard. I'm going to say a few times, or at some point, I mean, that I'm open to you using people not on this list. Sorry, I shouldn't. I don't know why I needed to take a drink in the middle of a short video, but okay. So Viktor Frankl, Logotherapy. So Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most important psychology books of all time. Viktor Frankl is like a big personal favorite. Sigmund Freud kind of speaks for himself. The father of psychoanalysis, the father of psychotherapy in general. Anna Freud, literally Freud's daughter, another super influential psychoanalyst. Really interesting work on what she called the nature of the ego. So I have there like ego. So remember back in the day, in the earliest days, psychology and was kind of called the ego psychology. Anna Freud talked about what that is, like what, and again, remember, not ego in like the modern sense, meaning like arrogant, but ego meaning kind of close to what we would now call the self. Carl Jung and analytic psychology. Okay, so there's these like kind of what they would call like three famous Viennese schools, like so from Vienna, and so it's like Freud's the first one, uh, Adler's the second one. You can see at the bottom there, and then Jung's the third one. And so these are all Adler and Jung are both people that were students of Freud. Well, a lot of people on this list are. Anna, obviously, too, his daughter, and a huge proponent of psychoanalysis. Um, but all of these people, but then these two people had their own branch, right? So Carl Jung's approach you can call analytic psychology, and then later you see people like Carl Rogers. And for some of you that are in this course because of your interest in working with, say, kids in the future, but in more of like from like more of a social work or therapeutic perspective, Carl Rogers and humanistic psychology did a lot in creating what we would now call like counseling. I may have ranted a little bit about this before, and I will at some point, but Carl Rogers is really about this idea of like, it's not just how I interpret your problem and then the prescription I give you to get out of it, which was more of a Freudian idea, right? Like you come, I'm a psychoanalyst, I'm an analyst, right? So that's like, that word says a lot. It's like you tell me your problem, I analyze it, and I give you some kind of prescriptive, you should do this. Whereas Rogers comes along and says, well, not necessarily as a challenge to that, but saying like, how you view me in this therapeutic relationship has a huge effect on if you're even listening, if any of my advice has any chance to even affect you. And he was very aware of this idea of the therapeutic relationship being key to um, any therapeutic effect actually working, regardless of theory. And this is where you'll maybe hear people say things like person-centered or client-centered, or this is like Rogerian theory, Carl Rogers theory. Piaget, we're going to talk about Piaget a lot in this course. He's very well known for child development, but one of the things I'd like you to think about when you're doing this with some of these people is that we're going to touch on them in some of our courses, but a lot of them were their reach extends well beyond just developmental psychology. They were a lot of them were well-rounded philosophers, and a lot of the people on this list are medical doctors or philosophers, historians, someone like Freud, um, someone like William James, functional psychology. So William James has an all-time classic called Principles of Psychology. If you can ever get your hands on it, it's a 2-volume book. I have it somewhere if anyone's interested. But in that book, it's interesting because some people would say, like, if you ever hear anyone arguing that it's not Freud that's the father of psychology, they'll be talking about William James, because William James is a little bit earlier date-wise, but he's a little bit more still philosophical than Freud, whereas Freud, so some people will call William James like the father of American psychology, and then Freud the father of kind of like European psychology, or specifically Viennese, so like coming from Vienna, his school of psychoanalysis. So it's just kind of interesting. But you could also talk about William James as the founder of what you could call functional psychology, and also another thing called pragmatism. Erik Erikson, we're going to talk about a lot in this class in relation to child development and his psychosocial model. But I would like you to kind of, if you're going to pick Erikson, pick something that's a little bit different than that. Because I want this project to not just be what do they have relevance for the developmental psych for, but how these key people that we're going to be looking at through this whole course kind of fit in the broader picture. Because in my opinion, that's super important. And I think that's one thing that can help maybe us understand how this whole kind of family tree of what we call psychology is, and how all these individual key people fit in, like kind of historically and also kind of topic wise. Okay, so Piaget did, Erikson, Erich Fromm, another fascinating, The Art of Being is his big book. It comes to me right away, but Erich Fromm, another psychoanalyst, so another person in this Freudian stream, which isn't too surprising because almost everyone is at this stage. And maybe I'll go to just another psychoanalyst, Sabrina Spellrein, talk about someone that's really interesting. She was somebody that her work is appreciated a bit more in hindsight now. If you would have only a while ago have ever heard of her as kind of a footnote of people talking about Freud, because she was just like, first of all, she had like a bit of a relationship, I think actually like I don't know if they ever had an actual physical relationship, but she was connected with Carl Jung. And so Carl Jung's a student of Freud, and they knew each other and they ran in the same circles. And so she was like kind of in that scene, and she kind of had these early ideas that then Freud would later continue in, this idea of the death instinct, Thanos, and like one of his big ideas, and he kind of attributes her. And so she's this like interesting historical player. She knew Piaget, so like she kind of fits in the story very interestingly. And all these key people that we talk about, like Freud, Jung, Piaget, all speak of her as like an equal. And so I think, or at least they talk about, what I mean by that is like conceptually, right? Like they're like, Freud literally credits her, why I said in a footnote, like he literally credits her in a footnote in one of his essays that's slipping me right now. But in that essay, he basically credits her for bringing up an idea that he later kind of used as the death instinct, which is one of Freud's big ideas, that we have like impulse towards living and death, that it's, and that's biological. And again, that's just like one of Freud's ideas. But it's interesting how she fits in. B.F. Skinner, the father of what you would call American behavioralism. So I'm going to try to keep this video relatively short, but I do want to kind of rant a little bit on each person just to see which one tweaks your interest. And then on the next page, I'll get into very specifics about the assignment. Maybe I will have just a little drink of coffee. Okay, where was I? B.F. Skinner. Okay, so Skinner's always going to be classified or understood mainly in relationship to his ideas around operant conditioning, which you've heard of and we'll touch on at different times. But this idea of like how punishment and reinforcements shape behavior. So Skinner's famous for his experiments with pigeons. But you might find really interesting, and I'm not sure if I think I did bring this up with you guys already, Project Orcon is kind of just like an interesting story about his work with the US military. And like, so a guy like Skinner is very complicated, and that's why kind of just for interest's sake, I have him listed here. Oops. I have him listed there as American behavioralism. And the reason I do that is because I think if you're looking at someone like him or Pavlov, it'd be really interesting to look at that from how their work kind of was situated or contextualized in the kind of geopolitical situation, because at that time it was the Cold War, right? And there was incredible tension at multiple levels between the States and Russia, or USSR at that time, the Soviet Republic. And so like Pavlov and Skinner can be looked at kind of interestingly from that perspective too, because they're both like huge name, influential scientists in those respective countries. Watson's an interesting one. So Watson famously said, like, give me any kid. I'm gonna butcher this statement a little bit, but it was something like, give me any kid and I'll make them into like a doctor or a plumber or a soldier. And he was basically in a lot of ways kind of the first of this line of behavioralists that are going to later include like Skinner and Pavlov. Because again, remember, it's like, except for Freud, where it's like literally a line, a lot of these people we're talking about, like, we're kind of schooling people based on time period or grouping them, I mean, based on like time period they came around and kind of their focus area, right? So people like Piaget, people like, the best example I can give for that is like how Pavlov and Skinner are kind of connected, because they're both in a class like this. If I'm teaching something like learning theory, I would kind of teach them back to back, right? Pavlov's classical conditioning, Skinner's operant conditioning. They kind of go well together. You teach them both as learning theory, but it's not like those two were like helping each other, right? Like they were like literally on different sides of a two-country superpower Cold War. So it's just the situation is interesting. Okay. And with Watson, it's like Watson also, very interesting person, started this thing around behavioralism, but the Little Albert experiments are very tough to watch. If you watch it, he's basically trying to train a baby, to be afraid of things, right? So like they're like literally, I think I linked you to a video, but in one of the first presentations. But anyways, so they basically have the baby there, and as the baby gets exposed to things, at first it's not afraid of things, but then as later it gets exposed to things like even like just like a fluffy doll or like a stuffed teddy bear kind of thing, it holds it, and then the guy that's out of sight slams like a steel pole into another steel pole, really loud irritating sound. The baby fears that. all of a sudden the baby starts to associate fear with this object. His experiment was trying to look at this idea of, do we learn fear? But you could look at that very critically as like very traumatic and traumatizing to that kid, especially if you follow up with who little Albert like literally was, because his name wasn't really Albert, and he was like a kid of like a poor nurse at that hospital, and like the story of, he died relatively early, and like the story of that kid's life, it's complex, right? And a lot of these people, this stuff is complex. Like even how earlier I was mentioning the connection with military efforts, right? So who am I on here? Bandura. And sorry again, if you want, you can, if you've already heard one that you like, you can fast forward the next few minutes. I'm probably going to take another 10 minutes or so going through this list. These are lists. This is just a list of tons of people I find interesting, and I think are like the key people in the history of psychology that has relevance to developmental psychology. Now, this is maybe another good time to make this point again, that like, if there's someone on this that's not on this list that you're interested in doing, and if like when I was getting ready to do this, I was just thinking the two names that came to me right away were like Otto Rank and Artie Lang, who are two other. Artie Lang's like a really interesting Scottish anti-psychologist, you'd almost have to call him, but his anti-psychiatrist, I mean, but his role in like questioning some of the medicalization of where psychology started to go in like the 80s and 90s was like, he played a key role whether you like him or not, and he had a lot of kind of Freudian ideas, and he talked a lot about things like schizophrenia and stuff like that. So yeah, all these people, super fascinating. Like you could go down huge internet rabbit holes on all these people, because they all, and that's kind of the point I'm trying to make with this assignment, is looking at these people as more than just people that like contributed a few concepts for each chapter, which I know you're not thinking about it like that, but that like when I was your age, or like some of your age, as soon, like if you're sitting there watching this and you're in like your 20s or whatever, like when I was in university, I really got a lot out of reading stuff like Viktor Frankl's writings, and reading stuff from Carl Jung and Carl Rogers and Eric Fromm. Sabina Spellrein I didn't really know of until more recently. Adler for sure, Kurt Wilber. I'm not even at some of these yet, but like all these people are Karen Horney, like so I'll just keep going on my list. But the point is that like reading some of their actual work is really important. Again, like Memories, Dreams, and Reflections by Jung, or reading like Society and Its Discontent by Freud, or some of Piaget's work there. So I didn't even say genetic epistemology. So think of what that means. It's like epistemology means the study of knowledge, like how we think we know what we know. And he's saying like, why do we think, Piaget we're going to talk about in this class, about how he's really interested in how a kid goes from like, sorry, I know I'm rambling and all over the place, but we would say like, we all know that a kid that's 2 and a kid that's 10 isn't mentally processed. They're not processing their world the exact same way, that a 10-year-old's like on average smarter than a 2-year-old. And it's like, but what exactly do we mean by that? And Piaget was really fascinated in that, like what is actually, he called it like, what are those stages of cognitive development, which is just a different way of saying, well, it's a more specific way than saying like getting smarter or whatever. It's like, because it's not just intelligence, it's processing, right? So he's looking at, what I mean by that, it's not just smarter in like raw ability, it's how they're actually making sense of things. So like what he would do is like ask kids questions and see how they're making sense of things. And is there a genetic way of like understanding what we understand about all that stuff around child development? So yeah, genetic epistemology, that'd be a cool thing for you to type into Google, and you'd start to get into some of the theoretical deep waters, and kind of his concepts that the stuff that we're going to talk about in class is kind of set on top of. And that's kind of the point for a lot of these people, and why I thought that this would be a cool first project. My first project with Nipsing. All right, so I'm on Bandura. So like this is just a Hall of Famers list. So Bandura and reciprocal determinism. So this is this idea that like I'm not just influenced by my environment, I also influence my environment. And in addition to that, it's not just me and my environment, it's not just nature nurture. There's a third variable, and that third variable is my behavior. So who I am influences how I behave, and how I behave influences my environment, and my environment influences how I behave, and how I see myself behave actually also influences me. So Bandura's classic model is just like a triangle that says like basically like me or self or whatever, and then environment, and then behavior, and that we almost have to give behavior the importance of its own standalone variable. And he called that, and he said that they all basically cause each other. So causing each other, he called determinism. They determine each other, and reciprocal means back and forth. So reciprocal determinism means like your behavior shapes your environment, and your environment shapes your behavior, and your environment shapes who you are, and who you are shapes your environment, and the same thing with self and behavior. So it's like this idea of like you're actually a super complex organism with this dynamic interplay relationship with your social world, and your behavior plays this central interacting variable. It's actually a really deep concept. Adler talking about deep concepts. So he's in this like second Vienna school. So Freud's the first, Adler second, Jung's third. So Adler's talking about this idea of individual psychology. Like, what does it actually mean to say that you're an individual? Right? You're not a wolf. And what I mean by that is like you don't have a collective pack psychology like a wolf would, or like a pack of wolves would. That they would actually like identify themselves as a group, not as an individual. That human beings have an individual psychology and individuation. And what does this even mean? Right? So Adler goes into really deep water, and Adler also, excuse me, is also associated with like stuff you may have heard around things like birth order, and a lot of that kind of comes from Adler, and also Anna Freud. So again, these people knew each other. Some of these people, right? Especially like this Viennese school, like like Freud, Adler, Erikson, Anna Freud, Piaget, Jung, Karen Horney. So like they would have maybe not known each other specifically, but would have known people that knew people, and it's like it was like it's hard to really overemphasize. It's hard to really capture how huge Freud was, right? Like there'll never be another psychologist at that kind of level of fame. Not even fame. Like he like literally like invented it. Fame's not the right word, and like by the time he came over to America and was like doing some final like lectures at, because again, remember at the time, like he's a Jewish man in Austria. This is right when the whole Nazi uh, the whole Nazi thing is like starting to really get out unstable, right? So like you can, and what I mean by that is you can see in his writings, and in there's a lot of interesting work that's been done about Freud's actual like his biography and his life, and you can see that he was really struggling with this, and his contacts in America were trying to get him to come over. They were like worried that he was going to get caught in this ever widening Nazi sphere of control, right? Because like Austria is obviously like right in the mix of Europe, right? So it was very interesting. So this person who's this, and the connection with what happened in World War II is huge. Like Viktor Frankl literally came up with his ideas while in a concentration camp. Like so same with Sabina Spellrein. Like she was influenced by that too, I believe. And so again, like the amount of complexity with these people and how they kind of fit in the historical and the geographical, political, like geopolitical, historical, cultural, uh, history, I guess, is dramatic. Okay, Ken Wilber. So Ken Wilber integral theory. So that's another cool one. That's probably the most modern one on the list. It's more newer, but I thought that because with this list I tried to stay away from just doing like the top 10 like current um most famous psychologists, because this isn't really about most famous. This list I tried to do from the perspective of kind of if I was to try to, because I basically picked 27 people, if I was trying to share with you what I kind of think through my years of looking at this, at if you could understand these 27 people, or get your head around because you do have to get your head around. I don't mean that like talking down to anybody. Like we're talking about things like Sabina Spellrein's ideas and William James's ideas and Virginia Satir's ideas and Vygotsky's ideas and Ayn Rand. It's like this is intellectual deep water, but it's there's a lot of healing in there. There's a lot of truth in there, a lot of wisdom in there, a lot of maps for getting ourselves out of a lot of things in there. So yeah, Ken Wilber, though, the whole reason I started that rant was to say Ken Wilber is one of the more recent ones and fascinating because he's looking at this idea that I would have to call like something like psychological holism, or like this notion that there's certain limitations to viewing ourselves as like emotional and cognitive and behavioral, and like even like what I was saying there before about Bandura's model. It's like Wilber said, like we're this integral dynamic system almost. Anyways, if you're interested, I would just encourage you to look it up. But he very interesting, worth inclusion on the list. Melanie Klein, object relation theory, Melanie Klein, another giant of psychology. And she's really looking at like even there, it's a cognitive focus, right? Like how we relate to objects, how we make sense perceptually. Like her work is very interesting. I think if you haven't heard of her, she's very worth looking into. Ayn Rand, I don't know what to say about Ayn Rand. Maybe the biggest, I don't know, maybe after Freud. It's so tough to say what I'm about to say, but maybe after Freud, Jung, and James. Like if you were to talk about like if you had to ask me, okay, like pick like your Mount Rushmore or whatever, it'd be hard not to have Ayn Rand on that list. It'd probably be Ayn Rand, Freud, Jung, and James. Uh, and I just freestyled that idea right there. I haven't been thinking about that, but I just wanted to give credit to how important I think Ayn Rand is, and she's a weird inclusion in this list in some senses because she's only somewhat considered like a psychologist. She definitely wasn't like a therapist psychologist at all, right? So she was more she was Russian born and later in life came to America, and she was who we would call the founder of what's called objectivism, right? Or it's this philosophy, and it's heavily linked with functionalism. So I think she wrote two incredible books that are like still ones that you should at some point in your life have on your reading list. And a lot of these people, it's like you don't have to, it's not like just because I'm recommending them, you have to like all these people, or some of their ideas are dated, or some of their ideas didn't age super well, or someone like Freud, like there's some things that some of his ideas didn't age well, and some of his ideas aged so well they're just what we call psychology. And kind of some people say like we only remember Freud's bad ideas because he had so many good ideas that are just what we call psychology. But someone like Ayn Rand, her the worth of looking into her. Oh yeah, sorry, that was a long rant. If you have your pen and paper out, the two books are called The Fountainhead and like Fountainhead, and which means like the center, and then Atlas Shrugged, classic. There's actually a really good book that's kind of a collection of writings because first of all, both those books are monster books, real big books, and real deep. But they're I guess you'd call them fiction books. because so what she does in, like, say for example Atlas Shrugs is it's a story about this architect, and or no, sorry, I'm switching them up. I'm talking about the Fountainhead right now, and but through the story she presents this philosophy of objectivism. Right, so what is objectivism, right? People right now, a lot of the kind of current thing is an attack, you could view as an attack on objectivism, right? On this idea that there's actually like a stable reality, that it's not all just individual subjective interpretation, right? So objective is like kind of the opposite of subjective to a certain degree, just to explain the words. Maslow, self-actualization. Right, you guys are like, is this list going to ever end? But I'm almost there. I'm just, please give me a little bit more again. Yeah, I don't know why I'm apologizing. Maslow, so self-actualization is his big idea. So that's the idea of like, if people can be in a situation where they're not struggling for food, struggling for safety, struggling for people to recognize them and accept them, then maybe they can actually reach these like higher levels of actually becoming their potential, right? And actually becoming your potential, actualization and self-actualization, like, but, and how that fits. So if you were to do Maslow though, it's not like that. I was going to say like, not just do the hierarchy of needs, although that's a key part of understanding his theory, but to go deep into where Maslow's coming from, because again, Maslow's way more than just the triangle that everyone knows about him. Although psychologists, or a lot of these psychologists, are really good at that. Like, I'm not knocking the hierarchy of needs triangle at all, because if you look at that, we could put that up on the screen and I could rant about that for half an hour, because that contains an entire theory, right? That's what a true like model is. It's like, what's a model airplane? It's not an actual airplane. It's like a replication of it, that if you understand what that is, you'd understand what an airplane is. It's like, if you understand that hierarchy of needs, you get his basic point that higher levels of personal development aren't even reachable if lower levels haven't been addressed, and that they're not, all of our needs aren't the same, that they exist in a hierarchy, right? Some are more important than others, and some are more fundamental than others. Okay, we're getting there. 9 more. You guys are like, oh my god, 9 more. Okay. Again, I'm like limiting myself a little bit, because I could rant about all these people. Again, it says there, just I'll read that important note at the bottom, you're not limited to this list. This was I want to say this too. If you're perhaps thinking like certain perspectives aren't being represented, or certain, especially from, this is off the history of developmental psychology is largely Western European and American. And if you're thinking like there's maybe ideas from other cultures or other things that, because there definitely is, especially if we broaden a little, like, just, this is just the first example that came to the top of my head. If you look at Buddhism, Buddha was clearly talking about things that have very much, you could almost view as cognitive psychology, right? So just because someone like, say, the teachings of Buddha, or even like to use another Eastern example, like an example like Confucius, right? You wouldn't necessarily consider Confucius a psychologist, but at a certain point, it's just a matter of definition. He definitely wasn't a therapist, but he was talking about the mind all the time, right? So he would have been, and that's kind of where it switches from William James to Freud. I was ranting about before, and Freud kind of becomes this person that tries to start to make psychology more of a science and less of philosophy, and you can see in his writings that he's kind of in that middle, and that's why William James kind of too, right? William James a little bit more towards philosophical, Freud maybe a little bit more towards trying to be science, right? And you'll hear me say this a bunch of times, that I think if Freud had had the benefit of the language of genetics, he probably would have, in my opinion, said things in somewhat that language, right? Because if he's talking about instincts and all this, these impulses and all that stuff, like now we just know that well, like your DNA and your genetics have a huge predictive effect on all kinds of things. So people that quickly dismiss Freud can be quickly dismissed, in my opinion, because I think it's like there's issues maybe with some of his ideas, but um, even just the idea of the unconscious mind and defense mechanisms is like worth inclusion on that list. If he said nothing else about anything else, let alone it writing the most important book on dreams ever, The Interpretation of Dreams, that literally you could say started the field of psychology, society and its discontent, like maybe one of the most interesting books ever written. His whole relationship with Freud, I mean, with Jung, basically. Oh yeah, there's a movie called The Dangerous Method that you can find that's about the relationship between Jung and Freud. You can actually find the letters between them online. Really interesting stuff, I think. And then, okay, so anyways, keep going with this list. So I'm on Pavlov. I'll skip because I think you know him uh, probably the most, or one of the most. Pavlov's dog is experiment. But again, if you're going to use him, I want you to go beyond that and maybe talk about how that's what we know about him. But it's interesting to know all this other stuff. Karen Horney. So she's interesting too, very much so, and especially historically situated when she was, right? So because it's when feminism was at a different stage too, and it's when psychoanalysis. So she was like, well, she basically started this idea of what we would call feminist psychology. Karen Horney, very interesting, very deep though, like, and with both her and Sabrina Spellrein and Virginia Satir, I should actually throw this, and even Anna Freud and even Sigmund Freud, I should throw out this like little bit of a warning or whatever that some of their work, especially Spellrein's and well, some of their work deals with abuse and the effects of that psychoanalytically. So that's just, if that's something that you want to stay away from, then I would just stay away from those people I just said. So oh yeah, Vygotsky. So you may have heard of Lev Vygotsky. So he's what's called cultural historical psychology. So this is something that you're not going to probably have at Nipissing, like a cultural historical psychology department, but it's like it's just kind of it's kind of just part of developmental psych, right? Like in developmental psych, we'll learn about this thing called the zone of proximal development. You've maybe already learned it, but it's this idea of like how to create a learning environment to optimize performance, and that's Vygotsky's idea, right? So a lot of these ideas are kind of integrated into the field. Okay, Virginia Satir I've kind of touched on a few times a little bit, but she's really linked to this idea of family therapy. So anybody, again, I wanted to make this point about her and Rogers. For the students that are coming from more of the counseling and social work angle, I think you'd find those two really interesting. And that just made me think of another person I don't have on this list, but Irvin Yalom. So that's like Irvin, and then the last name is Yallow. Yeah, Irvin Yalom. He's like the source for group therapy, right? So distinguishing that from family therapy, like group therapy being things like, well, you know what I mean about like having a therapy session with multiple people. And then Rogers, well, Rogers kind of comes before, and he's really talking about therapy in general, counseling, right? Like, so as soon as we start using that word, that's Rogers' influence. And then Virginia Satir's looking like, I guess family is like just a very specific type of group, right? Philip Zimbardo, the Lucifer effect. So if you know that, the Lucifer effect's a more recent theory of his, but the reason why you might know him is he is the psychologist that ran the Stanford prison experiments, which are some of the most notorious experiments of all time, some of the most interesting, but also, what would I say, or what should I say, ethically problematic is probably the way to say it. But still very interesting, and right along that line and right beside him Stanley Milgram. It's funny because Stanley Milgram did studies on obedience and conformity, and basically like the shock studies, if you're familiar. And it's like Milgram actually wrote, I think, Zimbardo like thanking him, or maybe it was the other way around. Yeah, I think it was. I think Milgram came first, and he like thanks Zimbardo for taking some of the heat off him, because these people, you got to think of when they were coming, right? And they were like, this is right after World War II now, right after all the atrocities with the Nazis. And now these two are basically showing that in the bad situation, good people can do bad things. And that wasn't what Americans were wanting to hear at the time, because it was so much easier to just view Germans as bad, right? And so anyway, so those two people took tons of heat, tons and tons and tons of heat. So again, I want to try to keep talking a little bit about, so a lot of the history of psychology, really, you can't really separate it from the world wars and the Cold War between the States and Russia, because that's what was going on politically and culturally during the development of this field. So I know I'm ranting a lot about that, but I hope you find that interesting. I don't know if you've learned about a lot of that, but that's kind of where my interest really peaks. Okay, so just the last couple, you guys are like, oh my God, he's going back up. No, I'll keep going down, but I'll just do these last three. So Martin Seligman, him and another guy named Michael Csikszentmihalyi, Csikszentmihalyi. He has a big, long last name. But he actually is a really interesting guy that's done some work with another guy at the University of Waterloo named Roger Manel, who I actually took classes from. So it's like there's, I guess, a bit of a link there. Csikszentmihalyi, the guy that taught the guy that I took a class from, Roger Manel, is the guy associated with the concept of flow, if you've heard of that. And Martin Seligman in Positive Psychology talks about this idea of psychological flourishing, and this idea of like, for most of psychology's history, it's about when people are experiencing some kind of unrest or trauma or psychological illness, or depending on the time period would determine what they call it, that's pulling them below normal. I don't know why I have this way. So let's just say this is like normal. My hand's like zero, a thermometer, and people are experiencing whatever we want to call it, illness or unrest that's bringing them down. And then psychology's role is to bring them back up. But the idea in positive psychology is that there's actually like tons of growth beyond just back to zero, that people can learn how to develop healthier relationships and healthier mind states, and learn how to interact better with people at work so that they're not stressed as much, and learn how to handle stress better and all those kind of things. Okay, two more. Fritz Perls, another. Oh, I could keep going on all these, but I won't. I'm trying to keep this relatively concise. But at the same time, I don't know. I like teaching to this group. I find this stuff super fun. I don't know what it's like with the video. I'm gonna see. I know for a lot of the things I've done for this group, I've like killed the video and it just audio narrated it. So I don't know if this adds anything to it or not. My wife says I have like a good face for radio. That's like one of my dad jokes. I don't have. Oh man, I shouldn't have tried to be funny. Okay. Albert Ellis, talk about, he's actually probably the funniest in some ways, guys, on this list. He's a character and a half. Albert Ellis, really interesting. He developed an approach called rational emotive therapy. Sometimes there's a B in there. Sometimes it's rational emotive behavior therapy. Think of it in the same kind of general branches. Cognitive behavioral therapy. You've maybe heard of CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy. Rational emotive behavioral therapy, you can see how that's similar. Rational means like how we're thinking, right? So how we're thinking is a part of our cognitive, but he's looking at how our thinking affects our behavior. I mean, our emotions, right? So rational emotive behavior therapy. So what he's really saying is like thinking, emotion, behavior therapy, and looking at the relationship between those things, and looking at how our thought patterns actually get us in certain emotions. And when we are in those emotions, then we behave in certain ways. right? Like say we're depressed and we're in a depressive thought spiral, and that thinking is keeping us in this negative mood, and that negative mood is having this effect on, we're staying in bed all day, we're not doing the things we used to like, we're eating differently, or we're not sleeping properly, or whatever, right? And it's like, to understand how to get out of that pattern, we need to understand how those things are interrelated and address it directly. So Albert Ellis, another fascinating character in the story of psychology, and maybe looking at them as, just for almost thought purposes as characters in this story. But again, my point, I don't know if I even like that characterization, because my whole point of this is to kind of say that they're more than just those words that we're going to use on certain slides to explain a few concepts, that they're actually, well, the giants of psychology. And I mean that in the most respectful use of that word. Okay, so let's actually talk about the assignment for a sec. You guys are like, thank God. I have no idea. I don't see a timer on this. I'm not sure how long, if I've been going 10 minutes or 30 minutes. Again, I appreciate anyways, I like you Nipsey students. I got a good vibe from you. I'll just be myself. I can't do anything else. So anyways, so this project, what I want you to do for this project is you can either do it by yourself or you can do it with one other person. Now, again, I'm a little unsure of, like, I don't know if you all know each other because you're theoretically like with each other in classes last year or whatever. So if you have like a friend in the course and you want to do it together, that's okay. I'm going to just ask for one assignment from the both of you then, with both your names and student numbers on it or whatever. But I'm going to probably assume that most of you will be doing it by yourself. But again, I'll just leave that up to you. All right. So I'm not going to like pick groups or make people do it or anything. Both people would get the same mark, pretty just cut and dry. I'm not going to be too elaborate with crazy marking schemes. I'll just kind of tell you what I'm going to do and try to be as fair and like down the middle and transparent as I can with like what I'm looking for and how I'm going to grade and stuff like that. But I'm going to avoid giving like super complex rubrics so that because I want you to engage a little different, right? It's like I want you to struggle with these ideas and think of, anyways, I'm going to tell you what I'm asking for in just a sec. So enough with the chitter chatter. So number one, okay, so with this assignment, I want you to basically address 4 questions. Number one, who is the intellectual that you're talking about? Are you talking about Ayn Rand? Are you talking about Freud? Why should we care? And I mean that with respect, but I also mean that because I think that that's a good framework mentally to approach this, right? Like, make an argument to me, the audience or the reader, that the individual's work who you're talking about has value to us, right, in these modern times, and for someone like you, like a modern student. So you're going to do that throughout these questions, right? That sub point kind of includes the next ones. But so number one, who are you talking about? So you're talking about Viktor Frankl. You're talking about Viktor Frankl because he went through this really intense period where he was actually, in Auschwitz, and he saw what was going on, and he had the mind. He was like a psychotherapist in Auschwitz. Like, talk about a uniquely interesting situation, although horrible, also very interesting. And he came out of it and he saw who lived and who died, and he saw how psychology affected all that. And he developed this idea of logotherapy, or like logo meaning, literally meaning. It means purpose or meaning. So like meaning-based therapy, or this idea that you therapeutically can help people heal if you can add meaningful purpose into their life. And he saw that like the people that, even though they were going hungry and even though they were under stress, that they still shared, or they still helped the old lady get back up, that actually their struggle to maintain humanity actually literally affect their longevity, which is a fascinating point, because it's saying that their social connection and their struggle to maintain dignity and humanity actually affect their immune system, actually like affected them biophysically, which which we know is now true. Like we know that definitely through oxytocin and through different biochemicals, our social relationships or like a hug from someone we love does have a biophysical reaction, right? A biochemical reaction in our body. Anyways, that was a huge rant. What I was basically saying is, who is the person? So to understand Viktor Frankl, if you just tell me his theory was this and you give me the quote, it's like, okay. But if you tell me like, okay, well, that it was actually hard-earned wisdom in this like really specific situation. Okay, so who is this? Why should we care? What's their key theoretical contribution to psychology? Right? When you're looking, and again, it's not, I'm not going to be like, no, that's actually their third key. It's like, I don't want you to look at it this way, like I'm going to try to get you like that. I want you to pick someone. I want you to read about them a little bit. You can just read on the internet or whatever. You don't need any specific source necessarily. I'm going to show you what I'm asking for in a sec. But I want you to be thinking about this idea. Who are they? Why should we care? What was their contribution to psychology? What does that contribution have to teach us about human psychology, especially in our modern times, like in 2020 and this current state of, craziness or whatever you want to call it, in terms of like all the lockdown and all that stuff, and everybody being way more physically isolated and socially isolated than before, and like, right, like, so you don't necessarily have to link it to that, but just you can talk about modern times like more generally, and then how can you use some of those ideas, like say the ideas from logotherapy around meaning generation and stuff like that. How could you use that to actually help your own personal life, right? How could you actually turn some of these concepts into applied functional maps to improve things, right? So I'm basically going to give 10 marks for each of those four things, a possible 10 marks, right? So I'll mark it at 10. Like, again, like I want to keep it relatively straightforward. And then I'll give basically like another 10 marks for overall depth and quality. So it'll be a mark out of 50. And this is worth 15% of your grade. So there are going to be two things like this. So I'm going to have them spaced out, but like they're each worth 15%. Okay. So here's your options. You can make a video, you can make an audio, and for anybody, if anyone's feeling anxious right away because they see the word video option, the third option below is that you can just do it as an essay. So you don't have to do anything video or audio if you don't want to. But if you're interested, and I would like to encourage you to, I want to do this digital workshop with this idea of, I want to tell you about this assignment. You guys have any questions? Shoot me your questions. I'll make a list of the questions. Just be like, hey, Mike, what do you mean by this? You guys have all been super cool and polite, and I've appreciated interacting with you. If you send me questions, even if you just, one thing that would really help, put in the title of the question, Giants of Psychology. And if I get maybe I'll answer people individually, but if I get a lot of questions, it'd be cool. Maybe I'll do like a follow-up video to this and answer them all if I think that it would have relevance for everybody and it's not super specific to a specific person's project. Okay, anyways, option one, video. So with this, I want to give the most flexibility as much flexibility as I can, because depending on how you want to do it, what technologies you want to use, and this is where you'll have basically free range. I'm very open to being creative. You can make a reaction style video. You can make like a TED Talk style prepared speech video. You could even make something that doesn't have you necessarily in it. You could do some kind of voiceover thing. If people are interested in doing this and are a little bit unsure tech wise, I could also make kind of tutorial videos on making kind of basic but interesting videos in like PowerPoint, or how to use something like Audacity for the audio idea below. I'm very willing to help with that. I would love to. And just if you let me know kind of where you could use support, because I also don't want to make tutorial videos for stuff that you easily know how to do. So like I need to get a bit of a gauge of people's tech levels of engagement. So again, I want to try to give options here, right? So some of you aren't going to have any interest in making videos, and this is actually kind of a maybe intimidating idea. And so I just want to say again, like there's going to be a written option in just a sec. So if you want to do this option, and okay, so again, so say you want to do a video, but you'd like just a little more direction of how you want me to do it. I'm trying to kind of be intentionally vague to give you flexibility, but I could provide more. I'll create additional content to help with technical parts, like I was just saying. I want to be a little bit, I don't want it to just seem vague. I want to actually be kind of intentionally less prescriptive with this to give you maximum freedom to express yourself based on your tech level and comfort level. Option number 2, you could do it as an audio essay. So with this, it'd be similar to the video option, right? Like you could do like a reaction style thing. You could do something that's like what I've loved. I've had students do this in other classes where they do almost like a video essay. I think video essays are super cool. So you could do like, say, like a 7 or 8 minute thing where you like, say you did somebody like, say you looked at like Eric Fromm, right? And like Eric Fromm is like very philosophical, and you talked about like what actually being means and like the depths of soul and like all that kind of stuff. Like that's the kind of stuff he would have written about. And maybe you kind of have some response to that and how that has meaning now, and you write it out, and then you like use whatever, your phone, or if you want to get a little more technical, I could do a tutorial on how to just basically use like a free software like Audacity and to record yourself. Right. And it's like, I think if you have fun with this, I'm not trying to like get you to do something tech related and then I'm going to be crazy critical of it. Like I want you to have fun and try to do something, because I know you're probably doing like 100 papers in every class or whatever. And it's like, and that's kind of what university is at a certain part. And it's very important to develop your writing skills and all of that. I'm not critiquing that, but I'm just trying to give a little bit of an option. I'm going to kind of see with this first assignment, like if people are into that, and if not, maybe I'll adapt a bit moving forward, but I think it would be cool. Okay. So, yeah, or you could do it like kind of like a podcast where you're kind of doing a more structured thing. So it doesn't have to be like a prepared speech. Like you could do it almost like a more structured short podcast. But if you do it that way, I would like it to be kind of scripted. So you're not just kind of, unless maybe you're doing it with somebody else and you're doing like a little back and forth or something. But I do want you to try to limit the audio or visual stuff, the either option 1 or 2, to about 10 minutes. 10 minutes of like quality video or audio content is actually a decently long time. Now I'm open to changing that. So say if you email me and you're like, Mike, I have this like interesting idea, but it's going to take significantly longer for whatever reason. If it's like for a reason like that, that's related to how you want to do the project, then that's fine. But I just wanted to put like a bit of put a little bit of structure to it. And then the third option, you could do it more like a traditional essay, right? Like more of an academic paper. I'd encourage people to do one of the first 2. And I'm just saying that to just push you a little bit to maybe try something new. And it's actually pretty fun. Like, especially once you kind of get over the fact that like, I can see my bald head there. And it's like, I'm just like, what's the app that adds hair back? It's like, there's no one, but I'm just trying to be funny. But it's like, once you get used to just seeing yourself on the screen, and there's even tricks, like you can even have it so that you don't see yourself at all, but it's still recording you there. Or again, for a project like this, there's no need that you would have to even be on camera. Like you could do it in PowerPoint, and you could do something like around Carl Jung and his art. Carl Jung's art is a really interesting thing, right? Because he had this thing called the Red Book, and he drew his dreams. And so maybe you had like some of those images and you were like, it was like a PowerPoint. So you made like a PowerPoint of images, and then you just, under the record function, you record just using like your headphones or whatever, the mic, you record yourself talking about those pictures or whatever piece you're going to record. And then you can just go into the save as and save it as an MP4 video file. And boom, you just made like a cool little video. And hey, if you guys want, you can put them on our, I made that like channel just for our class. So anyways, don't worry about that. It's not like that would only be if you wanted that. But like my point with this is I just want you to have fun with this. I want you to look into who are these giants of psychology, why people should care, what was their big idea, how does it fit into the broader thing, why it matters in 2020 and like how you can use it to affect your life. And I think if you take it from that perspective and kind of dive in, I can help with any kind of technical issues you run into. If you need a little bit more specifics, I said, oh yeah, for the written thing, about 6 pages. I was thinking minimum, a kind of maximum of 8 pages. Again, if you get going and you're lost in thought and you go up to 10 pages and it's like good quality and it's like interesting, that's not going to be a problem. But don't. I just want to give you some structure, right? I'll use Turnitin, blah blah blah. Use APA and references. You only really, because of how formatting is. Like if you're doing a video or something, I'm going to be judging it more on like kind of information quality. Referencing is a little bit different when you're doing the audio visual stuff. But if you're doing a written paper, then just do your like reference page or whatever, just like how you do all your other stuff at Nipsing, and just kind of standardize APA. Okay, so that was, just a quick little video. You guys are like, yeah, right. But compared to some of the stuff we do together, it's like we've done videos that are almost 3 hours. We've done probably 2 classes together, right? Those 2 videos, and it's well over 5 hours. Or at least over 5 hours. It's like that's a lot of content. That's a lot of time, right? It's like a whole season of a half-hour sitcom. It's like, but I'm enjoying this. I hope you're learning something. I hope that my delivery style is decent, and I'll try to keep getting better. I'm moving in, and my wife and I just bought a house, and we're moving in. We actually get possession in a couple of days, and we're moving in next week. And in the basement there, I got like a room that I'm going to be turning into kind of like an office den kind of studio lab. So I think like, and I just ordered a new computer coming. So like my production value hopefully will go up a bit. But you guys have been great. If you need anything, please reach out, and I'll try to get these videos tighter and better and stuff. And but yeah, at the same time, it's like part of it is just doing it. It's like if I was waiting till everything was completely perfect, I'd never start. It's like this isn't about. I don't need you to be perfect. I want you to. I want you to. What I'm really valuing is that you jump into it and that you kind of struggle with the ideas and that you push yourself a little bit in how you express it, and I'll reward that. And again, if you're not as comfortable with that kind of stuff and you want to do it as a more like traditional paper, I tried to provide a path for that too. Okay, so I'm about to stop this. Thank you for watching. I'll touch base soon again if you guys fire questions, and then if I'm seeing like a bunch of people asking similar questions, I'll probably do like a questions reaction video or whatever, and then let me know. And next week we'll get into infancy, and I'll have more information coming soon about how I'm planning on doing upcoming stuff too, in terms of the next stages of evaluations and all that. And again, with like even the quizzes, I think I might have stressed people out with my last email just based on a couple of responses I got that were very polite, but that just seemed like I might have stressed those people out that like, because I mentioned like upcoming tests and stuff. It's basically what we're going to do is quizzes, but relatively small quizzes. So like the quizzes aren't worth a huge component. Maybe instead of just adding this all as a rant at the end, maybe I'll do like a standalone video in the next few days that addresses like assessments in general and tries to be really clear and transparent rather than just kind of stumbling through it right now. All right, because this has already been a long video, and I just want to, if anything, I don't want to add confusion. I want to add clarity in terms of assessments. So maybe I'll just save that for a different video. Okay, so that's coming soon though. That's like front and foremost on my head about what I need to do to in my relationship with your group. So again, I've loved working with you so far. Reach out if you need anything. I've loved hearing about who you all are and all that stuff. And it's a cool group. I'm enjoying this, and I hope that you're taking the class next term too, because it's like we're gonna keep going here, and I want you to engage and try and take some chances. And like it's like I said this a few times, but I'll reward the effort and the and I'm not trying to bribe. I'm just saying like don't think that to succeed you have to produce like the most perfect thing. It's like I'm willing to, you know, it's not like all my videos are perfect. It's like, it's the attempt and the content and the depth of engagement and stuff like that. Okay. So again, thank you. Cheers and take care. Talk to you soon.